Hi, Misha here, and thought I would change it up a little bit and talk about a product line that I mentioned in a few videos last year, but I've noticed really instances of it are disappearing from the internet. And I wanted to talk about my kind of favorite figure from the brand, the maker's Action products. And these were licensed by NASA back in the late 90s. The product line seems to have lasted from about 1997 through around 2005, and lots of different scales, sizes, and elements, vehicles, figures, and generally the series is called Space Voyagers, but specifically the sub-series or sub-line Astro Squad. Now here we have three in a more or less modern space shuttle or International Space Station suit. This is supposedly Amy Taylor and the maneuvering thing. That was a big deal back in the 80s, but the truth is they didn't use it much. This is probably the newest one, size-wise, from the International Space Station, so-called Mac Powers. And then we have the oldest one here, Lieutenant Commander Steele, John Steele. This one has the maneuvering. This one actually comes with quite a few cool accessories. This one has the power of magnets. But we're not going to talk about the modern suits and whatnot today. I actually want to share with you my favorite one, and the first one made in this series. Wherever I put it over here. Let's scoot a bit further. Commander Wolf Perry in the Apollo A7LB EVA suit. He was the first one released. They announced him in 2001. He came out in 2002. And yeah, these are just really interesting to me. Now, full disclosure, I like science fiction. I like actual space history, not just fiction. I've always liked astronauts. And I would have loved these as a kid. In fact, my favorite G.I. Joe that I can remember was Payload, who was the astronaut in a pretty similar suit to this with a pretty cool helmet and backpack. He had the little manned maneuvering unit. He came with a few different ships. But I remember that very clearly. I wore that figure out, and these are kind of a modernized version. So I don't know. For no particular reason, I thought we would talk about Wolf Perry, because there's nothing on the internet about really the whole Astro Squad series, and in particular Commander Perry here. He was a fictional guy, but actually he's meant to be from Apollo 16, and we'll get into why that is specifically later on. But first, let's look at a couple of other Apollo A7L suited astronauts from Action products. This guy is 5-inch scale. They also did quite a few smaller ones in 4-inch scale, so this would be a 1/18. I don't know what 5-inch would be. It's kind of an odd scale. And I guess it was the same as the Playmate Star Trek figures, so it would be compatible with your Jean-Luc Picard in the 90s. And then the biggest one they did is this guy here, which is more of a 6-inch scale. So this guy's a 1/12, 1/18, and I don't know, 1/15 there out in the middle. So what's the difference in these? Well, accessories and articulation, and also kind of the target market. All of these were really designed to be sold at like museums, the gift shop at NASA, other science areas. I remember going to NASA's I've shared when I was a kid, 6, 7 years old, and picking up things like this, although in the 80s when I was there, they had more basic toys and kind of figurines. This guy is your very, very basic statue. He's just kind of a PVC. He stands really well, but just, yeah, stands there. To be fair, in the spacesuit, there wasn't a lot of maneuverability. So he's really solid feeling. He's very heavy. He's solid. He's not plastic. Well, he's a type of plastic, but he's sturdy plastic. Pretty good detailing. These are not expensive figures. Today or back then, you know, $10, give or take. Helmet, backpack. Yep. So that's the one. He doesn't move, but again, he's just there. He's just kind of a desk display for a kid or whatever, an adult or an adult kid. Next up is probably one they mass-produced the most. The little G.I. Joe-sized, roughly speaking, 4-inch scale figure. He did not come with any accessories, neither did the statue. He has his backpack. I don't think it yet, it didn't pop off. And he has basic articulation. I think he has 6 POA. The helmet doesn't move, obviously, because it wouldn't. It doesn't come off either, it's just a helmet. His arms move just in a simple rotational joint. Hands don't move. His hands are separated, so they are grippy hands. You could put something in them. As obvious by the very obvious joints here at the waist, these move. And he does have movable knees. This one's a little stiffer than the other. I haven't moved these in a while. Sorry, they're old. And as far as I know, they did 2 versions of this guy. This one, and then they did one with the red commander stripes that at first were used for Apollo, 13, although they were never seen because events. So Apollo 14. So yeah, he's your kind of basic figure. They made probably the most of these. And both of these figures came out before this guy here. He's only named one, but he's just really meant to be a generic Apollo astronaut. And he has 15, 16 points of articulation. Pretty good. Shoulders move. There's bicep. Decent elbow. Wrist. And then you have legs. Now they're limited, but that's more the suit than anything else. It's just a basic ball. And then you have your knee. But you do have little footsie articulation too, which kind of neat. So nothing at all impressive by today's standards, but when these were first marketed, they first promoted the fact that they were licensed by NASA using their logos and uniforms. And they were considered by them highly articulated, and really, to be fair, for the 21st century and compared to the astronaut figures we'd seen before, yeah, could do worse. And they were considered quote-unquote collector grade for the first time. On the other hand, they also said you could buy them for your kids if you wanted non-violent action figures, or if you're like me and both like Army men and spacemen. Why can the two not mix? I certainly did. Another few things that's kind of neat about this guy: his backpack does remove. You can unplug all the hoses and take it off, and his helmet does come off, but I hate taking it on and off a lot. But his little face plate does lift up too, and under his head does have rotation, but it's just side to side inside there. Nice tight fit, as you can see. Again, not super expensive or anything, but they were priced a little more than, say, a G.I. Joe of the day or time. Forgive me if I don't move him a bunch. I mean, he's 20 years old. So, and probably not very replaceable. So that's pretty neat. But what's really neat about these versus the other ones are the accessories. To begin with, you have a rock, a moon rock, space rock. I should say, I said that the guys over here didn't come with anything. That's not 100% true. The little guy actually came with a quote-unquote real space rock, and it was real. It was a piece of rock. And I believe this guy came with a patch, like a mission patch, so it wasn't 100% truthful there. Don't ask me where I put either of those. They're somewhere around here. To kind of go along with the thing, you have a scoop, essentially a shovel, and the rock will fit inside it if you want, or you could put sand in. I don't know, whatever. And it comes with a pair of tongs, or scongs as they were sometimes called. And this is actually the longer set used by later missions. You see them in his hands. They were about 32 inches. The early missions used shorter ones, more like this, but they found it was really hard for the astronaut to maneuver because, modern spacesuits aren't the most flexible. The first generation, the A7L, even less so. Although, to be fair, the A7LB here did have a little bit of added articulation for the wearer in the waist, because they were expected to actually sit down in these, whereas the original A7L, not so much. The A7LB, yeah, they also gave it some more endurance. The original A7L had about 6 hours of oxygen and coolant water. The A7LB had 7, and they both had a 30-minute reserve. Another cool little thing, they actually had little high-calorie protein bars in the helmet that they could get to. So they had a little snack built in, a little lunch. Because, yeah, they were expected to go on 5-6 hour walks with these at a time. And the so-called J-type missions, J-class missions, that Apollos 15, 16, 17, they were meant to be on the surface for roughly 3 days, 72 hours. The Extended Endurance Lunar Module, the ELM, had enough provisions without rationing for 75 hours on the surface, although, for example, Apollo 16's mission was there for 71 hours. This kind of goes to show you. And the backpacks had a little more space built in. They were a little heavier too. The whole the EVA part was about 78 pounds. The whole complete suit was over 200 pounds. Well, on Earth, that is. Not near as much on the moon. Good weight loss plan. Here. Let's try to see if I can get him to stand, but his joints kind of move. I think he's pretty tilted forward a bit. He kind of a little bow-legged, but what's kind of funny is because they articulated these and kind of went for more of the G.I. Joe pose, he's actually a little less bulky than he should be. Still have the fishbowl helmet though, and you can definitely tell what he is. But anytime you do figures, there's always going to be that concession. The gloves are quite blocky like they should be, but maybe even a little slimmer than the real thing. I think he's neat though. What do you think? I just don't want this series to be forgotten. But these are not all of his accessories. actually far from it, and the next one's kind of really tell us why he was Apollo 16. Next tool we get is a penetrometer. Yeah, it's a penetrator for the moon's surface. This geology tool was meant to basically you press down and this would shoot in to the surface down to a depth and then recoil back and monitor things, and it's a neat accessory. And it's only used, as far as I know, on Apollos 15 and 16. So that is good evidence of this being a long duration mission guy. The next one, though, is definitely Apollo 16 only. The ultraviolet spectrograph observatory camera. This is a pretty neat accessory. It is properly gold colored, which this was gold plated, and it does have articulation. It rotates on its stand and it pivots up and down, and it's got a viewfinder lens. Hey, that was a big deal in the 60s, or well, technically 70s, because Apollo 16 was April of 72. There's that. But yeah, this was meant to make ultraviolet observations of the Earth and distant phenomenon in the galaxy. Pretty cool thing. And almost as tall as he is. But yeah, that was only on Apollo 16. There was, of course, a lot of other scientific instruments. There was the Apollo Surface Experiment Package, Lunar Surface Package. Different missions had different elements, but essentially they were different experiments powered with a central core, and they'd be set up over a number of days. And like there was a magnetometer that they used on Apollo 16. And really just a lot of other scoops and bags. I think it would have been neat if he did come with a rock bag. For what it's worth, Apollo 16 brought back over 200 pounds of rocks and samples from the moon. And of course, pictures, or it didn't happen. And here's actually my second Commander Wolf Perry, although since he's in a suit, he can be anyone. I picked this guy up used. The first guy we looked at, I bought new. I opened the package, which I don't know if there's anyone really collecting these new in package. They're rare enough and obscure enough, which sometimes can make value, but also people don't even know they exist, and they're not military. They're not from a big, fictional thing. So I don't know. I kind of felt a little bad opening it up, but not bad enough not to. But I got this guy used. He came with his helmet and backpack, but no accessories. So another reason I had one in the package, because the accessories are neat. And this one is iconic for the space program in general, and Apollo specifically. This is the Hasselblad camera. The first Mercury missions had no cameras on board, but the first one to have it was number 3 with John Glenn. It was just a camera he brought. The first Hasselblads were the last couple of Mercury missions, and they were the Model 550C. They were basically off the shelf, except they had some components removed and changed to save on weight, and a little bit of modification to the film for working in space. But obviously they weren't working in a airless void. But these would have to. This is a Model 500L. And these are much more extensively modified for space use. In fact, one of the big things, they had to proof them because none of the lubrications inside would hold up in space. They'd burn off. They would vaporize, so that wouldn't work. They even had to commission special 70mm film from Kodak to work in space. And they were considered quite automated for that day and time. All they had to do was manually set the shutter rate, the distance, the apogee, and then hit the shutter. And then it would automatically cycle over, move over to the next piece in the film roll, and reset the shutter. Hey, you thought using an iPhone was complicated or whatever to take pictures. Even when I was a kid, I remember having to go develop film. So, yeah. These pretty much stayed throughout the entire program, even up through the very last one, Apollo 17. And it's really neat that Wolf does come with one, because it's just iconic. Sometimes they would be mounted on the chest too. For example, Neil Armstrong had his on the chest. That's why he's not in any of the still photos from Apollo 11. But then how do we have those images of his first steps on the moon? Well, because they didn't come from a film camera. They came from a TV camera. Because, what's American going to do when he goes to the moon? Well, one, litter. We left a lot of this crap behind, just taking the film canisters out. By the way, this has a kind of a silver finish to it. That was done for heat purposes, because these had to operate in over 200 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface. And they used them both on the moon and in the capsule as well. But yeah, TV cameras on the moon, which kind of brings us to a really neat accessory, and the reason I actually have two Wolf Perrys. The Lunar Excursion Model, the rover, the moon buggy. This did not come with Wolf Perry, but it's a very common accessory you see with him. And believe it or not, the vehicle is actually a lot easier to find today than the figure himself. So they must have made a decent number of these. It's okay. It's a neat little thing, and again, that's why I wanted two of these guys. And it has our video camera on it. This is an RCA CGTA camera. This was the kind of the final version, because believe it or not, recording a show on the moon was not easy, but it's something they knew they had to do for the Apollo program ever since the planning phase in 1962. We'll talk about the buggy a bit in a minute, but yeah, the camera. Initially, you had Westinghouse making them, and they started off as black and white cameras. In fact, if you think frame rates today can be bad, it was 10 frames per second and about 320 lines by 200. Since it was black and white initially on Apollos 7, 8, it's hard to say. And we had two different versions. We had one camera, video camera meant for use in the capsule, which could be bigger and really didn't have a lot of power constraints. But then we needed something smaller, lighter, and able to operate on lower power for the lunar surface. So Apollo 11 had a black and white Westinghouse. Now, Apollo 12 tried out a color Westinghouse, which had actually been test run on Apollo 10, but of course that didn't land. Apollo 13, well, didn't make it to the moon. Apollo 14 had the same color Westinghouse. Now, I should back up. The one used on Apollo 12 worked fine for about 40 minutes until they accidentally pointed it at the sun, which is easier to do than you'd think on the moon. And it burnt out real good. So with 13 and 14, they actually sent the black and white Westinghouse back as a backup, but they revised the color Westinghouse a bit for Apollo 14, and it worked better. At least it didn't burn out, but they had a lot of image issues, quality of the image issues. So beginning with Apollo 15, we started using this RCA. It was a little bit heavier. The old black and white ones were about 7.5 pounds. This would stretch up to nigh on 11, some of them anyway. And with the lens, and they had interchangeable lenses on at least some of them, it could be up to 17 inches long. But you know, for the day and time, it was very advanced technology. Getting color to work and transmit it, it had to be interpreted no matter what. You hear about NASA having deleted the original tapes for the moon. That's because the original tapes weren't really usable to transmit on TV. They had to be processed. Story for another day. But anyway, the RCA was used quite successfully on 15 and 16. They still sent the black and white Westinghouse as a backup, but by 17 they had enough faith in this little camera that they didn't send the backup. So how did they get video of Neil stepping onto the lunar surface? Well, the Westinghouse black and white was actually stowed in a bay on the descent part of the lunar lander, and he pulled a lanyard cord which pulled it out, and it was configured to target the ladder. So it was kind of very ad hoc, remote controlled. And then after that, they would detach it from the lunar lander and put it on a tripod, not unlike what we saw here. Different style, but tripod. And then when the rover came along with 15, they would go from the lunar lander to the tripod, and then they would mount it here at the front of the rover. And starting with 16 and then carrying through 17, it would just basically be packed in with the rover itself, meaning that we actually don't have any video of Young's first steps on the moon when he went with Duke on 16. But by that point, that wasn't really the deal with these long extended duration missions. And the lunar rover was a pretty neat piece of technology that they had. Thanks to the fact their feet move, they actually fit in this and even can put their feet on the little kickstand quite well. The driver set on the left hand. His control stick is up here. I do wish it was articulated. On this one it's not. It's just up there in kind of the resting position. But basically you pushed it forward to go forward, left to go left, right to go right, and you pulled it back to brake it. You also had a very simple control board here. You had the kind of fold out antenna. This was originally mounted on the limb, but with these missions it would be transferred to the rover. The camera, of course, detaches, and actually does on this too. And then our second crew member was an observer, kind of an ad hoc navigator on the moon, because believe it or not, no one had ever driven on the moon. And here they are, both on here. Gave him his camera, although probably in actuality he would not be carrying it while on the move. The dish does rotate on this. And our equipment modules back here. This is where they would keep most of their stuff. And it does come off and unplugs, and I don't know if it opens. I don't think so. Again, this is not a high-end thing, but it's a good accompanying thing for a couple of bucks. The real moon buggy was pretty flimsy too. It weighed about 470 pounds on Earth, under 80 on the moon, but it could carry over 500 pounds, well, of course including the men, but also samples and what have you. It was made from some titanium tungsten, but mostly aluminum alloy tubing. Everything very lightweight. The wheels weren't even rubber, they were actually kind of a steel and aluminum mesh. They had basically webbing for the seats with Velcro nylon seat belts, other strapping. The whole frame was hinged. It was 3 sections, so it would fit in the lunar lander. And basically, you pulled the cord and it dropped out, and it was partially self-deploying, kind of like a automatically inflating raft. At least it would kind of spread out, and then they just had to pull things up. Again, mobility is not great in a spacesuit, guys. So the more things that could be done by just pulling cords or whatnot, the better. It very famously had fenders that they had problems with early on because the moon is a very dusty place. But it was a neat piece of equipment. It allowed them to go over 50 miles from the LIM site. They never wanted to go any further than they could walk back in an emergency. And actually this had some rather tragic results for one astronaut later on, but anyway. It was only supposed to go about 6-7 miles per hour, but Americans being Americans, these were built by GM primarily, it could go over 11 miles per hour, which in a light gravity, it could go faster than you'd think. I mean, considering that the moon is the true definition of off-road and unpaved and untrodden tracks, the fact that it could go 11 miles per hour on that rough of a terrain. It had 2 non-rechargeable, essentially one-use batteries. And that's about it. It basically was just a metal framework of tubing to carry equipment, some samples, 2 guys, a communications, and a camera. But it actually had a very good record on the moon. These were used 9 times, 3 missions, 3 times each. And while there were problems with the fenders and a few other things, there was never like a breakdown. And it's actually remarkable because the design was created and built in under a year and a half. It was remarkable how well it worked, all things considered. And it really extended the range and science potential, able to go further and collect more samples. They would actually kind of make a 3-point thing where they'd go out and they'd have waypoints, and they would make a big circle and do experiments, pick up samples, put down tooling here and there. And they would not have been able to do that on foot. And it made the J missions a lot more useful. The original I missions, the Apollo 11, that was just to get there. The H missions, 12, 14, and would have been 13. Well, they did more, but they were still pretty limited. It was still pretty new technology. But by this point, they're really pushing the envelope of what they can do on the moon with 1970s technology. But like I said, Apollo 16 was in April of 72, and the last time we went to the moon would be in December of that same year with Apollo 17. Of course, it would be followed up by Skylab and Apollo Soyuz, so it wasn't quite the last flight of the A7LB spacesuit or the Apollo CSM, but it would be the last time the buggy took to the dirt and the lunar lander did anything. Of course, they said they're going back to the moon with the 4-man crew, but we'll see about that. And that's Action Products, mostly forgotten Space Voyagers, and all but forgotten Astro Squad, and virtually not even on the internet, Commander Wolf Perry ×2. And the somewhat easier to find lunar buggy. They actually did 2 versions of this buggy. They did one for the 5-inch guy, and they did a slightly scaled back one for the 4-inch guy. I think it's the same basic frame, but the stuff on top's a little smaller. This was not a big vehicle. It was only about 10 feet long anyway. So, I don't know. I think the accessories are neat. I would have loved this as a kid. I enjoy this a lot as an adult. Or a kid, if you ask my wife. But to be fair, I even kind of like the big statuesque guy. And the 4-inch guy is a good toyetic thing. Again, he's right scale for your G.I. Joe, and the limited articulation is not so hurtful when you consider the A7L suit. There are minor differences between the A7L and A7LB externally, but most figures don't really focus on that, so it is neither here nor there, I suppose. And again, these were officially licensed by NASA. They weren't, I'm sure they're made in China, but they weren't at least like an unauthorized Chinese copy or clone, although I have seen some 1/18 scale Apollo guys on eBay recently that are just straight out of China, and I'm halfway tempted to grab one. They're like $12. I bet they're remolds of this, but they do come with accessories. That's kind of the only bummer about the little guys. No accessories. I need to see if this thing opens up in the back of the rover. It might. Again, I know you can take it off the little thing. By the way, before the rover came along to haul their equipment, they had kind of a little wheelbarrow golf cart club transporty thing. Look it up. Like, kind of be neat if Wolf Perry came with one. I'm a little surprised they didn't give him an American flag, since that's so iconic, but between that and the tools, I'd rather have the tools, frankly. But what do you think? I just wanted to share something. I felt like talking about it today for no particular reason. Haven't done this. I mostly do my NASA videos in the summer, but February works too, I suppose. But no, I really think these are neat. And maybe next time we'll talk about the newer figures from the space shuttle and today's International Space Station, because this suit is actually directly based on the good old one. By the way, these are actually made by the Latex Corporation. Yeah. And multi-layers, but you know, we've talked about this suit before. It really is a marvel of engineering. Fun fact too, because natural rubber was used for some of the joints, they're all deteriorating today because this was a one-time use thing. They were never going to recycle suits, so they were only meant to last 6 months or so. Now the newer suits, because they are meant to be reused, some of them are very old, a little different. But anyway, I like space stuff, you might have noticed. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.